So Rene Descartes, he was certainly, people say he was a great philosopher. Certainly he was a brilliant scientist. I think I will be saying things which sort of cast doubt on whether he was that great a philosopher. It seemed like a lot of the time his arguments were unimpressive. He was certainly the last philosopher to really be kind of making God, well, maybe not the last philosopher, but one of the last philosophers to be making God a central part of his whole philosophical system. We'll see when we get to John Locke. John Locke kind of believed in God, and he thought it made sense to believe in God, but he certainly didn't put God into his philosophy very much. While for Descartes, kind of God was pretty central. Let's give it a little bit of a outline. So he was born at the end of the 15th, end of the 16th century. And he was in France. He got a law degree, but he didn't practice law. He spent a little time in the army. And then he was, there's a story that he was inspired by a series of dreams to question knowledge and existence. You sort of wonder, I mean, like, can you imagine like a bunch of dreams changing how you live your life? It seems like a strange thing to say, really. I mean, maybe if they were really dramatic dreams, I mean, it sounds like probably he was already wanting to do that, and then he had these dreams and they kind of maybe crystallized his ideas. He was especially known for his meditations on first philosophy, and we'll be talking mostly about that. But he also wrote other philosophical works. They were sort of more philosophy of science. They were about how to do science, how to think clearly. So he was at this major scientific revolution, and science was in some ways the main issue, the main way to think about things. And he was interested in uniting science and religion. He spent his final years being a tutor in Sweden to Queen Christina, but that didn't really agree with him. And he eventually, I think he caught a disease and died. So he lived to about like 53 years old. So he was especially known for his geometry, work in geometry. So there's the kind of Cartesian XY axis. He was one of the first people to really focus on that. So we'll talk about his meditations. So the goal of these meditations, there are 6 meditations in the work. And he says his goal is to kind of start afresh. He wants to find a foundation of knowledge that's absolutely certain and beyond doubt. Now that in some ways that's a very admirable goal, but we will also be looking at it and seeing whether it's a goal which makes any sense. So he practices what we might call a radical doubt or a radical skepticism. So he thinks that he can show that science and religion can be compatible. Now, he uses his radical doubt. So the one thing to really remember about him was that he was not a skeptic. We'll look at skeptics a little bit more and what skeptics believe. But skeptics generally kind of withhold their beliefs in things. Skeptics are often going to not believe in a God. They're not going to believe anything which they don't really have to believe in, or anything which is optional. They say, well, I'm not just not going to believe in it. But Descartes kind of believed in science. He believed in God. He believed in all sorts of things which probably a strong skeptic would not believe in. Right? So he is definitely not a skeptic, but he uses skepticism as a method to try and find the bedrock of truth. He wants to find a foundation. Also, I mean, his skeptical arguments, whatever we think of them, they kind of capture the imagination. They're sort of interesting. They show an active imagination. And so even if his arguments don't work, they kind of stick in the memory. So it's easy to kind of think of him as a skeptic, even though he wasn't. So skeptics, they're skeptical. They don't believe that what most people call knowledge is actually justified. And they think that the most ways that people have of trying to learn about the world are not really reliable. When it comes, we can distinguish between what we get from our senses and what we get through just rationality. We can think that both our senses are unreliable and that rationality can actually fail us. We've seen Plato was a skeptic about knowledge from our senses. He didn't think that our senses gave us very useful knowledge. And the ancient skeptics of Greece, people like Sextus Empiricus, he kind of said you should withhold commitment from a lot of beliefs and just have a minimal approach. So there's this idea that we can suspend judgment about a lot of things, and this is what skeptics like. I think for us in the 21st century, it's pretty easy to suspend judgment about whether God exists, and just as easy, or maybe easier, to suspend judgment about whether aliens exist. And we can worry about, we don't really have to worry about whether there's life after death, maybe. You can suspend judgment about whether electrons really exist. Obviously, there are some things where it's pretty hard to just be skeptical or suspend judgment. So, if you're not sure whether other people have minds, that's going to affect your interaction with people quite a lot. Or whether they have souls, or if the floor is real. If you're not sure whether the floor is real, what are you going to do? You're going to try and jump over it? Well, so some things require more immediate commitment. You can't just hope for the best, I guess. All right, so in his meditations, he's searching for certainty. Now, the way he sets out his meditations, there are 6 meditations, and he says that he did each meditation on a different day, and he did the whole thing in a week, so like 6 days. Whether that's actually true or not, I think is a judgment call or up for speculation. It sounds a little far-fetched to be able to get this major work of philosophy written in 6 days. So who knows what the truth is? It seems like he's using the structure as a way to present his ideas, whether or not it's literally true that that's how he wrote it. So he uses his skeptical method, and he finds a lot to doubt. Mainly, he does his doubting in his first meditation, and he's able to doubt everything. And then it's only when he gets to the second meditation that he finds something that he cannot doubt, and that is that he's certain that he knows his own thoughts and experience and that he exists. That's known as cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. That's his bedrock of knowledge. So with sensory doubt, he says, surely whatever I had admitted until now is most true. I received either from the senses or through the senses. And he says, so he gets a lot of his beliefs from his senses. But he says, well, his senses can lead him into error. And so it's probably best not to trust his senses. It seems a little quick. I mean, obviously we make errors. You know, you can mistake what you're seeing, but that doesn't necessarily mean you should always distrust your senses. It just means you should be a bit more careful. But for at least for the purposes of this inquiry, he says he's going to not believe what he gets through his senses. Then he ramps it up a bit and says that maybe he could be dreaming. Now, there's sort of two levels of skepticism you could have. One is that maybe you're dreaming now. So that's a possibility. Some people have very vivid dreams. And he says, how often has it happened to me that in the night I dreamt that I was here sitting by the fire when I was in fact lying undressed in bed? It's not the most interesting dream to have, that you're sitting by the fire, but that's a dream he said is at. So I guess that's his own report about how his dreams led him to a mistake. Seems a little odd that, I mean, when you're dreaming, how often are you wondering whether you're dreaming or not? I have had dreams occasionally where I'm thinking in the dream, well, this is weird, maybe I'm dreaming. But that's unusual in my dreams. I don't know how it is in your dreams. And then I guess sometimes I've said, oh yeah, I'm dreaming and this is okay. Although then generally I wake up pretty soon after that. Other times I have had dreams where I wonder if I'm dreaming and I decide that, oh, I'm not dreaming. So I sort of make a mistake about that. So Descartes' claim is that there are no definitive signs to distinguish waking life from dreams. Now, certainly dreams can be vivid, but here I am talking. I would say there is no chance that I am dreaming right now. Zero. I just think it's totally unlikely. So, I mean, maybe there are some times where it's a bit hazy, you're not quite sure if you're dreaming or not. But I think there's other times when you can be totally sure if you're dreaming or not. So that's and people have talked about that quite a lot. There's also the question, one possibility is you're dreaming right now. There is a sort of deeper skepticism or worry that maybe your whole life has been a dream. But it's like, well, what would that be? Like, you mean you've never woken up? Your whole life has been a dream? It is true that kind of dreams can be similar to real life experiences. Whether it follows from that, we can't really be certain that right now we are not dreaming. That seems to be a bit of a leap. But that's the leap that Descartes makes. Now, he also says that it's possible to be deceived by God or by some powerful being. he says, I will therefore suppose that not God, who is supremely good, but some malicious demon of the utmost power and cunning has employed all his energies to deceive me. So if you're adding 6 and 7 and you get 13, maybe every time you do that, the demon tricks you into thinking it's 13 when in fact it's another number. Now, I guess one question is like, is there any possibility that there's some sort of malicious demon trying to deceive me? That would suck if it was. And certainly no demon has made itself known to me. So it just seems like it's, I mean, what kind of doubt is this? It's like, this isn't, this is going well beyond like the doubt I might be dreaming right now. This is like saying, well, maybe I've been captured by aliens and I'm actually on a spaceship. It's like, it's kind of a bit crazy. So, and he says, well, now he can doubt, he's going to doubt even all arithmetic and geometry. So it seems like he uses these arguments, but he doesn't really make them very carefully. And he's saying, well, he's just going to doubt everything until he finds something which is absolutely certain. There is this. There is a question these days. No, I haven't really met anybody who worries about evil demons deceiving them. And if I did, I'd probably recommend that they either see a priest or get some help. But people have worried about like being in a virtual reality. If you've seen The Matrix presents a science fiction future where all but a handful of humans are actually in virtual reality, and they don't know it. So that's something we can imagine. And as artificial intelligence and robots can maybe become a possibility, maybe it's possible to imagine a world in which we are taken over by machines and they just use us for our energy and kind of feed us a virtual reality. It'd be a bit surprising that they feed us a virtual reality of like going to college. Wouldn't you want to have a different virtual reality than that as your life? But I mean, there is a possibility that we can do that. But again, it seems like extremely far-fetched. So Descartes kind of goes through all this. He says, now he can't be sure of anything. But then he says, one thing he realizes, when he's thinking, he knows he's thinking. When he's experiencing, he knows he's experiencing. There's no possibility of doubt about that. So it's totally beyond doubt. And he can also know that he exists when he is thinking. So that's it's an interesting idea. And it makes a lot of sense. It seems pretty impossible to doubt that I'm thinking when I'm if I'm having doubts. So it seems like it's he's kind of right that we can't doubt that. So that's his foundation, cogito ergo sum. So he uses this as his starting point for knowledge, and this is what he's going to build everything on. So it's a very sort of individualistic approach, and so certainly it was highly influential. As I've been saying, it seems like he's asking for a very high level of certainty, not one that we would use in everyday life. If you are a juror in a murder trial, the defense can try and say, well, then maybe there's some doubt that the defendant did it. It would be surprising if the defense said, well, maybe you're dreaming all this. That wouldn't seem to be a good defense. Or maybe you're actually in virtual reality right now. It's like, well, or maybe you've been captured by aliens. It seems like that would be a very weird thing to say. We're not interested in that level of doubt, even when you're looking for proof beyond a reasonable doubt. So it seems like this level of certainty he's looking for is extremely high, one that would be very hard to achieve. And so if Descartes was right that he could get this level of certainty for everything, that would be great. But generally, if you think there's a doubt for something, you have to have some reason to think that that source of doubt is real. It's not just some totally random imagining thing. Now, Descartes goes from like saying that he's certain that he exists, and he says, oh, that makes me understand that whatever I clearly and distinctly perceive is true. That's suddenly he's saying like that gives him a way to know what's true, and he says it's whatever he clearly and distinctly perceives. Like, well, so whatever is clear in his head, what is totally, he can't find any reason to doubt. So this is we can get puzzled then about what would it actually be to clearly and distinctly perceive something? What makes us so sure that something is true and beyond doubt? Almost parenthetically, he makes an argument bringing in God, which is somewhat surprising. Like suddenly he's bringing God in, like as if he can be sure about God. So he says, whatever I clearly and distinctly perceive is true. And he gives this argument. He gives some arguments for God. He says, I clearly and distinctly perceive that God is omnipotent, benevolent, and veracious, and therefore everything that I clearly and distinctly perceive is true. It seems like that's a pretty circular argument. So it has we definitely don't believe that circular arguments are good arguments. So it's not sure that that gets him anything. I want to look very briefly at these arguments he gives to try and prove that God exists. So the first one is couched in terms which are pretty confusing for us because we don't really think this way. He talks about ideas having reality. He talks about formal reality. And what that seems to mean is like something like what we would mean by perfection. So he says you can define God as a substance which is infinite, independent, omniscient, and omnipotent. And he says, in order for a given idea to contain such and such objective reality, it must surely derive from a cause which contains at least as much formal reality as there is objective reality in the idea. So there's all sorts of assumptions he's making about formal reality and objective reality. But the basic idea of the argument is that the idea of God is so perfect that I couldn't come up with that idea myself. The only way I could have that idea is if God gives me that idea. So the only way I could think of God is if God put the idea of God into me. And I thought my parents told me about the idea of God. It wasn't God doing it, it was just my parents doing it. But Descartes says, no, before my parents told me about God, God put the idea of in my head when I was created. And that's the only way I could have got that idea of God, because there's no way I could understand the idea of God without God putting it into me. So like that seems a sort of curious argument, and certainly not very convincing. So this idea that he clearly and distincts that God must exist seems to be just not very plausible. He gives a second proof of the existence of God, which is to do with how you keep on existing. And he says that it must be God who keeps me existing. But that's very confusing, because I know generally I think, well, I just keep on existing naturally. It's not like something needs to keep me existing. So that's a very puzzling argument. And then he gives a version of St. Anselm's ontological argument. He says the essence of God is to be a perfect being. That's a sort of definition. You can define God however you like. Then he says existence is a perfection, and therefore, if God is perfect, then God has to have the property of existence. Therefore, God exists. I mean, lots of philosophers have addressed that argument, including even Thomas Aquinas didn't think it worked. So it seems like far from being crystal clear. Maybe there's a kind of some sort of plausibility to it. But so the main point is like he's said he's sure of his existence, then he's sort of tried to bring in God, and he thinks then God is going to guarantee his beliefs, and then he says he gives these proofs of God. They're entirely unconvincing. So it seems like he's demolished all the kind of the regular beliefs with his method of doubt. He's proved that he exists, and then he fails to build everything up. So although he tries not to be a skeptic, in some ways the effect of his whole meditations is to induce a kind of skepticism, which is exactly not what he wanted to do. And what he's especially kind of well known for, and people still like his ideas today, is saying that the mind is like the soul. The mind is not just like the soul, the mind is the soul. It's an immaterial substance, and it's entirely different from the body. So his argument for that is basically extremely like that of Avicenna. So we can wonder about that. We can look at the argument. He says he has a clear and distinct idea of his mind as a thinking thing and nothing else. So he can think of himself just as a mind without a body. And that's what Avicenna did with his floating man thought experiment. He says he could think of himself just as a kind of mind without a body. And he says he has a clear and distinct idea of his body as an extended thing. And then he says, well, if God, if you have these two things which are totally separate, then God can make them separate. So he says mind and body can exist independently. So there's a lot to unpack in that argument. Now, we don't really know whether Descartes knew about Avicenna's floating man argument. It seems basically pretty much the same argument. And it's entirely possible that he read Avicenna's argument and didn't mention it. That's just left to our speculation. Now, so there's this question about like, what can we imagine? Can we imagine things being separate or going together? And to what extent does that make sense? So let me give an example. Can you imagine a talking squirrel? So, yeah, can you imagine the squirrel comes up to you and it says, "Good afternoon, how are you doing?" Can you imagine that? That seems like it's pretty easy to imagine, right? Now, exactly what are you imagining? Like, have you imagined the little squirrel lips moving? Do you imagine like its throat, its having vocal cords moving? How clearly do you have to imagine it for you to really imagine it clearly and distinctly? suppose, like, suppose you can imagine that. Does that mean that a talking squirrel is possible? Like, well, what do we mean by possible? Possible. I mean, could God make a squirrel talk? I guess, maybe. It seems it all seems pretty hazy, and so you can look up videos of talking squirrels on YouTube, and I mean, so that they give a good example. We might sort of think of kind of things being separate. Or, so part of the question is, if just being able to imagine something, does that really make it a real possibility? So I mean, it seems like it's not logically impossible, but what are we talking about? Physical possibility? Certainly squirrels as they are now with their little squirrel brains, and the squirrels don't have vocal cords. I mean, squirrels do make some noises. They make a sort of squeaky noise, right? But seems like it'd be physically impossible for them to actually talk because they don't have the vocal cords and they don't have the brain power to actually kind of control anything like that. So, I mean, so when Descartes says, oh, the mind and body could exist independently, it certainly doesn't show that mind and body are in fact separate. I mean, I think many people would say these days, your mind is just your brain operating. That's all there is to it. Like, what is it to have a mind? Is to have a functional brain. And could you have a mind without a functional brain? We would say no, that doesn't make any sense. Descartes' argument that you can imagine the mind as a separate substance doesn't remotely prove that the mind is a separate substance. The whole argument seems a lot less clear than Descartes would like it to be. There's also this question about what does he mean about having a clear and distinct idea of your mind or yourself. I mean, I have thoughts and feelings and emotions. I experience them. Do I have a clear understanding of what they are? Quite often, I have like half a thought in the back of my head. I'm not quite sure about it. Or I have a feeling and I think, well, what's that? Or emotions, emotions can be very unclear. They can be very confusing. So what do we mean to say we have a clear understanding of our own mind? Does it have like having a science of mind? It seems like we need a lot more than Descartes gives us. We can imagine like very simple experiences, like the taste of salt. I can easily imagine like the taste of salt, and it seems like I have a good understanding of the taste of salt. It's a very simple thing. So I could understand having the taste of salt without having a brain, I guess. I'm not sure exactly what that would be, but I'm not sure how far that gets us. And do I have a complete understanding of my physical existence? I mean, Descartes thought that the whole nature of matter was to be extended. Now, we're pretty sure that's wrong. Certainly matter takes up space, but we don't think the essence of matter is taking up space. These days with modern physics, we have quite a complicated conception of matter as being made of protons and neutrons and electrons, and they have different properties, very different from how Descartes was thinking about it. So do I have a good understanding of matter? Do I have a good understanding of physics? I mean, most of us don't even have a good understanding of physics, so we haven't done a whole lot of physics. You might ask like a physicist, do they have a good understanding of matter? And who knows what they're going to say? They might say matter is pretty confusing. So So Descartes' claim that we can just understand mind and body as separable just seems far less clear or plausible than he really kind of would like it to be. So it seems like his whole argument that you can separate mind and body and you can create that, you can prove that just by thinking about it, just seems highly unlikely. But that view that the mind is a separate thing from the body, obviously that fit in very well with Christian belief. It fit in very well with the idea that the mind is a soul, is not physical. It fits in very well with the idea that you can survive your physical death. So people definitely kind of liked his view and they grabbed hold of it. I'm not sure how closely they thought about his arguments for it. And philosophers since Descartes have found his arguments interesting. Let's talk a little bit more about his view of matter, because in some ways, Descartes' philosophy of science was pretty interesting, and it's going to also help us think about other philosophers. So Descartes, like a lot of other scientists of the time, thinks that everything is composed of tiny particles. And generally they were called corpuscles. Now, this is in some ways a very similar view to that of Democritus and the Epicureans, that everything is made of atoms, tiny corpuscles. But there's a big difference between Descartes' view and the view of the Epicureans. So they thought, the Epicureans, that you have little atoms and then there's space between the atoms. Descartes' view was that all of space is completely filled by these tiny particles. And he thinks it's actually sort of logically impossible for there to be any empty space. And that sort of derives from his view that anything which takes up space has to be kind of matter. And he had this view, which is sort of, in some ways, it's sort of surprisingly modern. He thinks light consists of small particles traveling in straight lines. And so he talked about corpuscles of light. But so his corpuscular theory, and he thinks like everything's made of corpuscles. He thinks the essence of matter is extension. He thinks the vacuum or void is logically impossible. He did have a theory of vortices, which explains especially how the planets move in ellipses. He didn't think that there was action at a distance. So he didn't believe in a force of gravity, right? He thought that the planets were being affected by these swirls of atoms moving around in space, and that caused this regular motion of the planets. So this view of his view of matter as just taking up space, basically his idea is that you'll be able to reduce all of physics to geometry, which seems a very surprising claim and hard to imagine how that could ever happen. But that's what he was thinking. And we'll come back to that kind of idea when we look at the work of Immanuel Kant. He was certainly rejecting Aristotle's ideas of inherent qualities like color and taste, and we'll talk about a little bit about that in a second. So he thinks like there are fundamental properties of matter, and then you explain people's experience by those fundamental properties. So interestingly, he thought that heat was related to rapid particle motion, which is very close to the kinetic theory of heat that was later endorsed by science. So in some ways, it seems like he was his ideas were in some ways quite promising in science. As I said, he rejected the possibility of action at a distance. And he strongly believed in mechanism. So, it's worth talking about this distinction between primary and secondary qualities. This will be very big when we talk about Locke, and then it'll come up again with Hume and Kant. So Locke very much defended the distinction between primary and secondary qualities, and his views are very similar to that of Descartes. So the basic idea for Descartes is like, just look around you could look at a physical object, and it has fundamental properties like size, shape, motion, and number. It's made of corpuscles, and that's what's going to explain its appearance. So stuff like color and taste, the sound of something, the smell of something, that's not part of its fundamental properties. Rather, that's how it looks to us. Those properties of color and taste, sound and smell, they're actually in our heads. They're not actually a part of the real world. Right. So that model of science, I think, was very powerful. And in some ways, it's a model that we're pretty sympathetic with today. You know, we may not believe that we can get the same sort of clarity and distinctness of ideas that Descartes thought, but we certainly think science should be as clear as possible. He had this idea of a mechanistic model of nature, where you can explain everything by the motion of all the atoms, and he thinks that you explain things with deductive reasoning and mathematics. That seems like that seems too narrow, because we are going to think, well, there are laws of nature which you can't get through deductive reasoning and mathematics. Right. So I mentioned this, the idea of nature as a machine. It was highly influential for all science, really. The idea that the whole of nature is a machine governed by interacting parts. Those parts are determined by deterministic laws. So one of the big reasons why one of the reasons that was such a big deal is that it was rejecting the idea of purposes or causes in nature. It was saying that all of science should be talking about mechanical causes, not like the inherent purposes of things. So like trees and mountains and people don't have inherent purposes, like Aristotle said. Rather, we can just explain things in scientific ways. So why does he reject Aristotle's approach? Well, there's two sorts of reasons. One is he says, well, it's beyond us to really know what God is imagining for us, what God thinks our purposes are. So we can't do science in that way. No, God's power and wisdom are infinite. We have these puny minds. So for us to look for the purposes of things is to trying to get into God's head, and we can't do that. So that's not a good way to do science. And he also thought that mechanism is really the way to go. That's going to be able to explain things much better than anything else. So trying to explain why things happen in terms of the final causes, the purposes of things, is not a good way to go. In some ways, it seems like it's such a sensible idea. And certainly in physics and chemistry, we don't talk about final causes. It is sort of striking, though, that in biology, we do talk about purposes. What's the function of the eye? Is to see. What's the function of the heart? Is to pump blood. So that's a very common thing people say in biology. So it seems actually that modern biology has gone back on that, has disagreed with Descartes. We do think we can find purposes, and they help to explain things in biology. But Descartes has this very mechanistic view, and he thinks that we can understand the causal relations in nature. And he thinks in some ways that we can understand that, we can make it all intelligible. He's quite, in some ways, he's sort of quite Platonistic about it. We can understand the true nature of things through our reason. And he thinks that nature sort of reflects a kind of divine order, not in terms of purposes, but these uniform laws of nature that he proposed and that went on to be proposed by Isaac Newton. So while he doesn't necessarily insist on such clarity and distinctness of ideas that he was talking about in the meditations, he does say that in science you need to be very clear. And that seems to be a very good way to do science, to be as clear as possible. So there's something about his method for science which is highly plausible. And like most other people of the time, he believed that causation was mechanistic, that it involves physical contact. And when you have two things hitting each other, there are predictable laws for how those things will go on moving. So the view of causation you can get from the interaction of things is going to explain everything. Some ways people were very optimistic about how much science could achieve at this time. Descartes had this idea that you could actually reduce all of physics to geometry, that matter is just extension, and we can explain how things are just with geometry, and that's going to mean that we can reduce the whole of physics to geometry. I think in a modern perspective, that seems a sort of bizarre idea. But he thought that you could explain optics and mechanics and fluid dynamics using geometrical models. So it was a very ambitious approach. So Descartes' like scientific philosophy was kind of very influential. He was very rationalistic in that he thought that we could understand deep things about the world, and we could understand it bringing in kind of God, and we could see the harmony between science and religion. But at the same time, it was bringing in all the kind of mechanistic ideas of the time that he was thinking about. He was highly kind of impressed by geometry and thought that would help us in science. And his whole approach has been extremely influential on modern science. All right, so where does that get us with Descartes? In some ways, his views seem to be kind of a little bit crazy and certainly unproven. And then at the same time, he was a great scientist. So certainly one of the things he accomplished was like trying to apply a scientific model to philosophy. And that was highly influential. We've seen that his own work was highly flawed. And some people have argued that his sort of insistence on how separate mind and body are has had a bad influence on Western culture. It's led us to ignore the connections between mind and body. So now in the 21st century, we tend to think of ourselves as being very sort of aware of how mind and body affect each other. We think about, especially in terms of like how stress can affect the body, how kind of positive thinking can help us. Some people claim that being optimistic is better for your health. And certainly we were also aware how like physical problems can affect our minds, affect our kind of mood. So we're aware of those things. So people say that thinking of mind and body as separate has led science and medicine to neglect those things. I think it's a little unfair on Descartes. Descartes was certainly very well aware that mind and body interact, and he thought the interaction was a very kind of close interaction. But he still thought the mind and body were separate things. So his achievements, he was a great scientist, and he did groundbreaking work in math. He did great work in setting out the methods of science. He proposed laws of motion that anticipated the work of Isaac Newton. He thought that the natural state of motion of a body is just to remain at rest, or if set into motion by an external cause, that's then removed to remain in uniform motion. That seems very similar to what Isaac Newton said. And he thought that an object is not going to move in a curved path unless there's an external cause on it. And clearly he was very good at applying math to understanding physics. So I think there's a sort of a mixed record with Descartes. Maybe his philosophy has been highly influential, but it's also kind of deeply flawed. But certainly, if you're teaching the history of philosophy, it's pretty hard not to teach Descartes.